Everyone wants to get big and strong, but those are not necessarily the same things. And they're not the same training methodologies. And today, I'm going to tell you the top 5 exercises to get strong, the top 5 exercises to put on muscle, and the top 5 exercises that will cover both areas. Again, it's not the easiest thing to be able to do, and there are some contradictory principles, although there is significant overlap. So let's unpack this. Now, before I get into these exercises, I need you guys to know my programs are on sale right now until January 5th. Down in the description and in the pinned comment, you guys can get your hands on these programs 50% off for the next week before I launch Moose Coaching 2.0. Get your hands on them now while they last, and let's talk about these exercises to get you big and get you strong. First, let's talk about how we get strong. Now, you get strong through neuromuscular adaptations, more so with how your brain communicates to your body rather than growing muscle. So strength training, building neural connections. When it comes to hypertrophy, we're talking about causing muscular damage, introducing metabolic stress, and introducing a level of mechanical tension on the muscle. Those 3 factors seem to be the ones that promote hypertrophy. Now, we know a lot less than we think we do in both of these areas. Nonetheless, those are the currently understood best mechanisms for why you get strong and why you get big. Now, you can naturally understand why these two aren't the same thing. If we're training our nervous system, the importance is training motor patterns to be able to perform a movement at a very high intensity with very high coordination. Whereas in bodybuilding, you're looking for focus on the muscle. You're looking for tension on the muscle. You're looking to not shift load away from the particular muscle that you're working on. In the strength world, if we're doing something like squats, we want to use all of our muscle. And if our quads start to give out, we want to start bending over more to avoid that work on our quads to be able to keep pushing more weight and doing more reps. Now, perfect technique comes in a sense, but ultimately, how can your body lift the most weight is a totally different question to how can you work your quads the best when we use squats as an example. Now, let's put this into practice and let's talk best 5 exercises for strength. To me, an exercise for strength, it has to use your whole body. It has to use a very heavy load. It cannot have a large stability component. So those 3 are the primary factors. Now I'm going to go over 5 areas of the body or of movement patterns that we need to address. It is legs, posterior chain, press, pull, and carry. I'm going to repeat that for our best hypertrophy exercises and for our best of both worlds exercises. So first off, for strength, for the legs, I have low bar back squat. Now, for those who don't know, high bar is up on top of the traps. Low bar is on the back of your delts. If you sit the bar slightly lower, you have a shorter moment time between the bar and your hips, meaning that you have more relative strength for that barbell. It's a simple calculation. We take a vertical line, go bar vertically down, and then we go hips vertically down. If we can shorten that distance in any possible way, we're going to have a greater mechanical advantage at the hip. Now, arguably, you could just stand up totally straight and have your shoulders and hips stacked on top of each other, but we would then be increasing the moment arm on the knee. This is why moving the bar to a lower bar position does not increase the moment arm on the knee, but does reduce the moment arm at the hips. Naturally, you can lift substantially more weight. So low bar back squat is going to be my best exercise for getting strong legs. Next up, posterior chain. I don't think there's any argument here. Deadlifts are the best option. Now, specifically deadlifts on a very stiff bar, whether this is a squat bar, an axle, a power bar, that's all fine. As we start to elevate this pull, it becomes less useful for total strength. Partial pulls, I'm not a huge fan in terms of building overall strength. So anything like an elephant bar, a deadlift bar, a rack pull, that to me is not going to be as potent to build full body strength as a deadlift from the ground. Moving into pressing. For me, strict standing overhead press is going to be the number one. Now, not the strict overhead press way that I do it, where I almost push my body away from the bar. I'm talking a relatively straight torso, pushing that bar up over your head, relying on your core stability, your shoulder strength, and your tricep strength to push that bar up into the air. When it comes to pulling, I love the Pendlay row. Now remember, when we build strength, we're looking for neuromuscular connection, and we're not really looking to control the weight. When it comes to eccentric movement, it is increased muscular damage and lack of potent response to increase your power because you're just slowing down weight. Slowing down weight doesn't really promote pushing weight hard. In the pen lay row, the bar starts on the ground and it finishes on the ground. There's no element for you to need to control that, meaning that we are only getting the concentric benefit. And with the pen lay row, it's a very explosive first half of a deadlift followed by a row the best you can. This mitigates muscle damage and promotes that neuromuscular connection. Last up for carrying, I say farmer's walk. This is probably the most underrated exercise in the gym, full stop. Farmer's carries, they improve your grip strength, which improves your strength in the rest of your upper body. There's a neural response up chain when you strengthen things down chain. And farmer's walks will also build your forms. It will also build your traps when we're talking about hypertrophy. I really, really like these, and farmer's walks are a must if you're looking to improve your overall strength. Now, those are my top 5 for strength. Before I go into anything further, pop in the comments if you think I missed something and what you would include in your top exercises for strength. My number 1 honorable mention is going to be leg press. The reason that I have squats over leg press is because leg press is not axially loaded, meaning that it is not strengthening your core in any way. It is strictly focused on the legs. So if we can get more meat on the bone and more muscles working, I believe that's a superior strength exercise. Now let's talk about hypertrophy. In my career, I've added 100 pounds to my body. Some of that is not the most useful, but a lot of that is muscle mass to be able to move weight. Going from running at 220 pounds to world's strongest man at 325 pounds, I've had to learn a thing or two about hypertrophy and how to grow muscle well. Here are my top 5 exercises that I find useful for myself and for other people to stack on some mass. Number 1, for legs, is going to be pendulum squats. You'll notice a theme here. Remember, for hypertrophy, mechanical tension and metabolic stress are 2 very important factors, and we're going to get away from this if we have any element of the ability to shift technique. So any sort of free bar squat, you can have tired quads and shift away to use more posterior chain or vice versa. So we want to find things that sort of lock us in and give us no choice but to use the muscle that we're focusing on. And this is why I love pendulum squats. There's no moving your feet. Your back is fixed. The plane of motion is fixed. If you get this set up correctly and you have a good pendulum squat machine, you are off to the races. A very similar argument would exist for belt squats, but I find belt squats, you can adjust your technique a little bit more than you can on something like a pendulum squat. Next up, the posterior chain movement for me is a Romanian deadlift with a barbell. Okay, barbell and straps. We never want grip to be the limiting factor when we're trying to strengthen the posterior chain. Now, Romanian deadlifts, they start at your hips, you shoot your hips back, you stretch your hamstrings the best you can. The bar is very unlikely to touch the ground. In this way, you are strengthening and putting stress on the hamstrings, the glutes, the spinal erectors, your core. We're building muscle in all of those very important areas, and that is why I love Romanian deadlifts for adding muscle. For pressing, I have closed grip incline press. Now, the reason for incline press is because the range of motion is substantially greater, and range of motion is going to be one of the important things to be able to put on muscle. A muscular stretch, according to the research, is one of the most valuable things to stimulate new muscle growth. If you think about a flat bench press with the chest flared out, the range of motion there is substantially shorter than if you're pushing that bar up over your head, because you don't get the entire thickness of your body to benefit from. Now, if we move our hands in slightly, we're now not only focusing on our chest, our big, strong, powerful muscle to do this movement, but we introduce our triceps. The weight will be slightly lower, but the balance of work between triceps, shoulders, and chest will be much better, which is why I believe that this is the best pressing exercise you could do for total body hypertrophy when it comes to pressing. With pulling, I have seated cable V row. Now, if you remember, for strength, I have pen lay row. The seated cable V row in the same movement pattern is about as far away from that as we can get. There's the eccentric and concentric component. There is no axial loading necessary. Therefore, we can focus strictly on the muscles trying to do the work. In this case, this is going to be the lats and the mid-back. If we're pulling our elbows and focusing on contraction, we will be getting a muscular response from our lats and our traps. It's very difficult for other muscles to take over or other muscles to disproportionately fatigue if you're executing this exercise correctly. Small tip on this: if you are doing seated V rows, you do want to think about your elbows being pulled, not the weight being pulled. It's about how far back you can get your elbows, not if you can get the weight into your body. Okay, always remember that. Range of motion is all relative to when you feel that muscle stop contracting when we're talking about building muscle. Lastly, for carry, I have heavy barbell shrugs. Now, this isn't necessarily a carry per se, but I believe it's the closest alternative for a bodybuilding perspective. Now, we are actually loaded, so we're going to be building strength and muscle in our midsection, but this is a large upper back exercise. And if you're thinking about ways to be aesthetically pleasing and for people to know that you train at the gym, the two areas that I believe show it the fastest are forearms and traps. So if you build big traps with heavy barbell shrugs, that will be extremely useful when it comes to building muscle and, of course, looking good. Now, that's all well and good. We've got a few exercises for strength, a few exercises for hypertrophy, but most people want to get big and strong, not one or the other. If that's the case, there is less concern than you think about rep ranges. You could do 3 rep range and you can get big and strong. You could do a 10 rep range and you can get big and strong to a point. But how should you do that? Let me tell you about my top 5 exercises for getting big and strong simultaneously. It is worthwhile to say that a novice lifter can do this very effectively. As you go further in your journey and you become advanced, the law of diminishing returns says that if you don't put full focus on one of those elements, that you're not going to be able to push yourself forward because it is so difficult to make such small incremental gains when you get close to your genetic potential. Now let's talk about best of both worlds exercises. First up for legs, it's going to be high bar constant tension squats. Constant tension because we are not going to let the muscles rest and relax ever. High bar because we're going to put a disproportionate load on our legs. High bar is going to require us to stay more upright, and this is going to force our legs to do a lot of work. In terms of technical execution, you want to make sure that you're not bending over more than you have to. Now, those of us with long femurs, you do have to bend over to some extent, but do not make this any more than it needs to be, especially when you get tired. So high bar, constant tension squats. I'll also add, if you bring your feet in a little bit and point them forward compared to what you normally would for a strength squat, it is also going to disproportionately benefit your legs as the range of motion increases with that narrower stance. For your posterior chain, I am putting stiff leg deadlifts. Now, in contrast to Romanian deadlifts, which start at the hip and focus on a big stretch in the hamstring, stiff leg deadlifts are deadlifts with your hips slightly higher. You're going to want to maintain that strong neutral position, nice strong core brace, but the bar will get to the ground every time. This way, we get a good stretch, which promotes muscular hypertrophy. We get a good range of motion, which promotes muscular hypertrophy. And we get relatively heavy weight moving through a very important movement pattern for strength. So I really like stiff leg deadlifts for building strength and size together. For pressing, I have done incline Swiss bar press. Now, let me explain why. When you bench press with a pronated grip, you tend to want to flare your elbows out. This puts a big stretch on the pecs and allows you to lift more weight when you're not conditioned and trained to be able to lock your triceps into your lats. Okay, most people will be strong with a wide grip and flared elbows. If we use a Swiss bar and our hands go neutral, immediately our elbow position is going to go from flared to a little bit more to a 45. That 45 is going to be very useful when it comes to lifting heavy weight, lifting it safely, and being able to use pecs, shoulders, and triceps in relative proportion. Now, to contrast this from the close grip bench press, the close grip bench press is going to be slightly more on the triceps than it needs to be in order to build muscle in that important area. When we go to a Swiss bar and we lock our hands in a neutral position, we're going to be able to lift more weight and still have triceps do some work. So it's blending this mix of heavy loads for strength training and acknowledging all muscles involved for hypertrophy. And to me, this is the best of both worlds. Next up for pulling, I have the bent over barbell row. This is pretty obvious why. It's a mix between the cable row and the Pendlay row. Of course, the bar does not touch the ground here. There's a massive demand on your spinal erectors. It's not the most effective exercise to build lats because your core is going to be the limiting factor, but it is a good exercise to build lats and a great exercise to build strength for your spinal erectors. So bent over barbell rows get my stamp of approval. Last up for carrying, I have either a frame or a trap bar walk. This is not going to be for speed, especially if you're using a trap bar. You don't want to knock your heels on the back of it. but some sort of movement while we're focusing on holding that implement. It is still going to build muscles of the upper back. It will build strength in the core. It will build strength through the lower half of your legs, but you're not going to need to move at any sort of rapid speed that might limit your ability to hold on to weight for a substantial period of time. One thing that people don't appreciate is that moving faster with weight makes it harder to hold on to. Every time you take a fast step, that ground reaction force is going to be transferred back up through your hands. And the faster you move, the more it's going to want to pull this weight out of your hands. So a little bit of food for thought, especially for you strength athletes out there. Those are my exercises. You got 15 exercises for 3 different goals, strength, hypertrophy, or both. I would love to know what you guys think I missed out on, what you agree on. And if you have nothing else to say, leave a moose dropping in the comments. As per usual, lift heavy, be kind. Check out the merch down in the description and in the pinned comment. Appreciate your guys' support tremendously. Subscribe if you haven't already. And until tomorrow, lift heavy and be kind.